Hey guys, Tyler here. Star Trek as a franchise has been around for over half a century. Having spawned 10 television series and 13 feature films, Trek is rather impressive when it comes to how consistent it's been with its own lore. While strict adherence to canon is not something the new shows always achieve, especially when it comes to things like visual effects and production design, the truth is Star Trek has been retconning itself ever since the original series was still airing. And between all of the spin-off shows, from The Next Generation to Enterprise and beyond, there's bound to be some inconsistencies when it comes to character backgrounds, planetary identities, technology, historical events, and so on. In this video, I'd like to examine 5 of the presumably most significant alterations to canon that the writers have penned, and offer my thoughts on whether those changes were in fact improvements. Let's get started. First things first, something I want to get out of the way. This video will not include every single continuity error that has been made throughout the franchise. I'm also not going to talk about changes to the Klingons' makeup or anything like that, as that falls under aesthetics, which have changed between nearly every installment in more ways than one. Rather, I'd like to examine some of the other changes to the lore that were made on purpose. So here we go. Number 5. Benjamin Sisko's dad. This is kind of a small one, but in some earlier episodes of Deep Space Nine, Benjamin Sisko's father, Joseph Sisko, is heavily implied to be, well, dead. In Emissary, Sisko refers to his father in the past tense, saying, "My father was a gourmet chef." Sisko further recounts his father's grave illness in The Alternate, suggesting that Joseph was deceased. It's not until Season 4's Homefront that we see Joseph Sisko to be alive, though maybe not in peak health, which in and of itself may be a nod to Benjamin's dialogue in The Alternate. Sisko's line in Emissary could also be interpreted as Joseph having given up cooking sometime before opening Sisko's Creole kitchen, though it's more likely that his backstory had simply not been developed yet. Number 4. The original series time period. In my video about stardates, which was, of course, not controversial at all, I talked about how the original series method of time measurement was created to purposefully avoid stating what century the show took place in. Indeed, in Gene Roddenberry's initial pitch for TOS, he intended for the show to take place sometime between 1999 and 2999. That's quite a wide range, and they do make use of it. Again, the purpose of this was to avoid arguments over whether certain technologies would have been invented or even superseded by, say, the year 2265. But in the episode The Squire of Gothos, when the Enterprise is 900 light years from Earth, the crew comments on how the Q-like trickster alien Trillane has been observing activities on Earth from 900 years in the past, except Trillane's clothing is distinctly 18th century in appearance, and he is aware of the assassination of Alexander Hamilton, as well as a musical composition by Richard Strauss. This would place TOS's time frame in approximately the late 28th century at the earliest. However, other scripts, including Shore Leave, produced before The Squire of Gothos, suggest TOS may take place as early as the 22nd century, when Sulu describes a 38 Special handgun as being 200 years old. The same also goes for Space Seed, when Kirk tells Khan that the Botany Bay has been drifting in space for 200 years. We learn in that same episode that the augments come from the late 20th century. As a matter of fact, the original series placement squarely in the mid to late 23rd century is only confirmed in the motion picture, when Will Decker says that the Voyager 6 probe was launched over 300 years ago. This is further solidified in The Wrath of Khan, which literally opens with the title card in the 23rd century. So kind of an open and shut case. By the way, bonus fact, it was originally suggested that The Next Generation took place in the early 24th century instead of the 2360s. As in Encounter at Farpoint, Data says that he was part of the class of 78, i.e. 2278. This was later retconned to the class of 2345 in Conundrum, after TNG's setting in the 2360s was solidified in the neutral zone. Number 3. The Eugenics Wars and World War III. Speaking of TOS's time period, there's also the matter of its references to other past human activities, particularly our global conflicts. I talked about this at length in my video about Khan's Empire, as well as my video about the mid-21st century nuclear World War III. But suffice it to say, in the seminal Season 1 episode Space Seed, Spock refers to the Eugenics Wars of the 1990s as humanity's last so-called World War. The conflict saw the rise of genetically augmented supermen, mainly concentrated in Asia. Khan Noonien Singh was, of course, the most notorious of the augments, having reigned over a quarter of the planet until he and the other tyrants were deposed. Later, though, in Encounter at Farpoint, World War III is retconned again to be a mid-21st century nuclear conflict, and in later installments, totally different death counts are provided for each of these wars. This inconsistency could be chalked up to the way that Spock, or just Vulcans in general, refer to the chronology of human conflicts. Perhaps World War III is seen as a continuation of the Eugenics Wars, especially given the genocidal actions of the despotic militia leader Colonel Philip Green during World War III. But as it's written in dialogue, it definitely seems like the different series writers had different intentions. Number 2. The Klingons and Romulans' respective cultures and relationship with the Federation. So, this is a big one. In the original series, the Klingons filled the niche of the cunning totalitarians who used deceit and plotting to achieve their goals. Romulans, on the other hand, still had a militaristic outlook, but with more of an emphasis on honor and duty. So how did these species' respective roles in the story get swapped? The answer, dear viewers, is that originally the script for Star Trek III: The Search for Spock featured the Romulans as the antagonists instead of the Klingons. While the identity of the antagonists were switched, most of the other script elements remained the same. The Next Generation and other series subsequently compounded this association between the Klingons and the Samurai Bushido-like Code of Honor, while effectively retconning the Romulans as the sly and sleazy space KGB, so to speak. When it comes to the political relationship between the Federation and the Klingons, we see another pretty significant retcon play out over the course of TNG. In the Season 2 episode Samaritan Snare, during a conversation in a shuttlecraft between Captain Picard and Wesley Crusher, Picard tells the young lad about the time he fought some Nausicans, something that we see in Tapestry. Crusher asks,
"Was this before the Klingons joined the Federation?"
To which Picard answers,
"That's right."
This would imply that the Klingons, well, became out-and-out members of the United Federation of Planets, with a whole seat on the council and everything. But as we see later on, this is simply not so. It's only by the 26th century of a possible future that Klingon Federation membership is seriously entertained, according to the Enterprise episode Azadi Prime. Attempts at explaining this retcon include Crusher referring instead to the 2352 Treaty of Alliance between the two powers, nearly 60 years after the Khitomer Accords. While a plain reading of Crusher's line does imply actual membership, in my opinion, I would say that this retcon is sufficient. And of course, later in Star Trek Discovery, we do find out that the Romulans did join the Federation by reunifying politically with their Vulcan cousins sometime between the 25th and 32nd centuries. Also, something else that Enterprise lightly or not so lightly retcons. In the TNG episode First Contact, Picard speaks to a Malkorian official about mankind's disastrous first contact with the Klingon Empire, which eventually led to a lengthy and bloody war between our two species. We see in Enterprise that nothing like this ever happened, though Discovery does depict a mid-23rd century war between the Federation and the Klingons, over 100 years after First Contact. Number 1. Literally everything about the Trill. Arguably, except for TOS's century, as I mentioned earlier, this is probably the biggest actual retcon in Star Trek. The Season 4 TNG episode, The Host, introduces the humanoid Trill species, along with their most distinctive physical trait, the slug-like symbiont with which the Trill are joined, or, well, some Trill, as we later learn. In the episode, a Trill ambassador named Odon is brought in to mediate a dispute between the moons of Pili-Arzel, another Federation member. However, a shuttlecraft accident kills Odon, leaving the symbiont in need of a new host. A sweaty Commander Riker fills this role until another Trill host can be secured. And as they say, shenanigans ensue. The thing about the host is that even though the Trill are hinted to be Federation members, something that's never actually confirmed until Discovery, no human, or really any other outsider, has learned up to this point of the existence of the symbionts. The existence of joined Trill, who make up a fraction of Trill society, is later treated as a widely known fact, however. And besides this and the fact that Odon has forehead ridge makeup that is never seen again, there are quite a few other differences between the host and later Trill appearances. The symbiont is referred to as a parasite on more than one occasion, and is presented as completely taking over the host body, rather than the mixed personality seen with the Trill in later installments. Odon can also not use the transporter as it would harm the symbiont, something later never referred to again. And finally, whereas Odon, in Riker's body, is ready to resume a romance with Dr. Crusher that she had shared with Odon's previous host, a Trill taboo against reassociation is depicted in the early seasons of DS9. Suffice it to say, I think that the changes made to the Trill with Jadzia and her regular appearance in DS9 made the Trill a more interesting and dynamic species, as they were made to be more than just a meat bag for an androgynous invertebrate that couldn't use the transporter. As for how long the Trill have been members of the Federation prior to Discovery's 32nd century time frame, well, that's honestly a topic for another video, one in which I explore the biology, history, and culture of the Trill species, and try to work out some other discrepancies regarding their portrayal throughout Star Trek. When will such a video arrive, you might ask? Well, I'm not really sure at this point, but given that the Trill are my favorite species, you can rest assured that I'm pretty excited to cover them at some point on my channel. As I've said before, I certainly have not included every significant retcon throughout Star Trek in this video. That would probably take too long. Some honorable mentions, of course, include James Kirk's middle initial changing from R to T, the apparent death of Admiral Kirk prior to Scotty's crash on the Dyson Sphere in Relics, how long Odo and Dukat have been on Terok Nor during the Cardassian occupation of Bajor, how long they've both known Kira, and more. But in any case, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up down below and don't forget to share it. That stuff really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do that as well so you won't miss future uploads, and click the bell icon to receive all notifications. If you want to support my work even further, becoming a patron or a member is a great way to do so. Links to those, as well as my social media and merch store, are in the description. That's all I have for this week. Live long and prosper.